The rain hammered against the windows of the rented sedan as I drove through the iron gates of Mount Auburn Cemetery. 36 years old, and this was the first time I had been back to Boston in over a decade. The windshield wipers struggled against the November downpour, much like I struggled against the knot of emotions threatening to surface. I wasn't here for reconciliation. I wasn't here for closure. I was here because even estranged sons have obligations to the dead. The parking lot was already crowded with Blacktown cars and luxury sedans, a testament to my father's reach in this city. Silas Blackwood had built an empire from nothing, transforming rundown properties into gleaming office towers and luxury condominiums. The funeral would be a who's who of Boston's real estate elite, city councilmen, and bank presidents. I adjusted my simple black suit, the same one I'd worn to job interviews and community meetings in my work as a social worker. No designer label, no Italian leather shoes. Just Marcus Blackwood, the son who walked away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The funeral home was suffocating in its opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany panels and Persian rugs. Mourners whispered in hushed tones, their voices creating a low hum that reminded me of the stock exchange floor. I recognized faces from newspaper society pages, people who'd known my father as a titan of industry, not as the cold, calculating man who dismissed his eldest son's dreams as bleeding heart nonsense. Marcus. The voice cut through the murmur like a blade. I turned to see Adrian approaching, every inch the successful businessman in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. My younger brother had grown into our father's image, sharp jawline, steel gray eyes, and that particular way of carrying himself that said he owned whatever room he entered. Adrian, I nodded, keeping my voice neutral. I'm sorry for your loss. His smile was thin, practiced. Our loss, brother, though I suppose you've been grieving the relationship for years already. The barb hit its mark, but I'd learned long ago not to rise to Adrian's provocations. He was still my father. Was he, though? Adrian's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. When's the last time you two spoke? 5 years? 6? 7. The word came out harder than I intended. 7 years since the Christmas dinner that ended, with Silas calling me a disappointment to the family name, and me walking out into the snow, vowing never to return. The service was everything I'd expected, formal, grand, and emotionally hollow. Speaker after speaker praised Silas Blackwood's vision, his business acumen, his charitable contributions. No one mentioned the father who'd missed school plays because of board meetings, or the man who'd measured his son's worth in quarterly profits. I sat in the back, feeling like a stranger at my own father's funeral. The cemetery was worse. As they lowered the casket into the ground, I felt nothing but emptiness. Not grief, not relief, just a hollow space where reconciliation might have lived. Adrian stood at the graveside accepting condolences like a crown prince, while I lingered at the edges of the crowd, ignored by most, and pitied by the few who remembered I existed. Mr. Blackwood? A woman's voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Gloria Reyes, my father's longtime lawyer, approaching with measured steps. She was in her 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that commanded respect in courtrooms and boardrooms alike. Ms. Reyes. I shook her offered hand. Thank you for handling the arrangements. Of course, your father was very specific about his wishes. She paused, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Perhaps you could join us tomorrow at my office. For the reading of the will? I almost laughed. I'm sure there's nothing in there that concerns me. Nevertheless, she said quietly, your presence is requested. 2 o'clock. As she walked away, I caught Adrian watching us from across the cemetery, his expression unreadable. Something cold settled in my stomach, the same feeling I'd had as a child when I knew I was about to be disappointed. Again. Gloria Reyes's law office occupied the top floor of a granite building on State Street, its windows offering a commanding view of Boston Harbor. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly out of military habit and partly because I wanted this ordeal finished. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, offered me coffee that I declined. My stomach was already tight enough. Adrian arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, flanked by his personal attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked like he'd been bred specifically for corporate law. They swept past me without acknowledgement, disappearing into Gloria's private office. I followed, feeling like a third wheel at my own family's funeral. The office was all dark wood and leather-bound legal volumes, the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost with the stroke of a pen. Gloria sat behind her mahogany desk, several manila folders arranged before her with military precision. She gestured for us to take seats in the chairs facing her. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the weight of decades in courtrooms, "thank you for coming. I know this is difficult, but your father was very specific about his final wishes." Adrian leaned forward, his posture confident. "Let's get this over with, Gloria. I have a board meeting at 4. She opened the first folder, withdrawing a thick document sealed with blue ribbon. The last will and testament of Silas Blackwood, executed 6 months before his death. Her eyes met mine briefly before she began reading the formal language that would reshape our lives. The bulk of the estate, the real estate empire, the investment portfolio, the family home, all went to Adrian. Every asset, every holding, every carefully cultivated connection in the city's power structure, he would inherit not just wealth, but the Blackwood legacy itself. For me, there was a single envelope. "To Marcus Blackwood," Gloria read, her voice softening slightly, "I leave this letter, written in my own hand. The past is done. You made your choice." Adrian's attorney was already calculating, no doubt running numbers on the estate's value. My brother sat back in his chair, satisfaction radiating from him like heat from a furnace. He'd won. After 31 years of being the golden child, he'd finally claimed his prize. I stared at the envelope in my hands, my father's familiar handwriting stark against the cream paper. 7 years of silence, and this was his final word to me. A dismissal, a confirmation that I'd never mattered. "Well," Adrian said, standing and straightening his tie, "I suppose that settles things." He paused at the door, looking back at me with something that might have been pity. "You always said you didn't want any of this, Marcus. Congratulations. You got your wish." The door closed behind him and his lawyer, leaving me alone with Gloria and the weight of my father's judgment. I stood to leave, tucking the unopened letter into my jacket pocket. There was nothing left for me here. "Mr. Blackwood." Gloria's voice stopped me at the door. "A moment, please." I turned back, expecting some perfunctory condolence or administrative detail. Instead, she was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part concern, part calculation. "Your father was a complicated man," she said carefully. "He made many decisions in his lifetime. Some he regretted. Not enough to change them, apparently. Perhaps." She hesitated, then opened her desk drawer and withdrew a second folder, this one unmarked. "There's something else. Something I wasn't instructed to share unless you came back to Boston." My hand tightened on the door handle. "What are you talking about?" "A second will, Mr. Blackwood, written 3 months after the first. Your father asked me to hold it in confidence, to be revealed only if you returned for his funeral." She looked directly at me now, her lawyer's mask slipping to reveal something almost maternal. "He wasn't sure you would come." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "A second will?" "Sit down, Marcus, please. There are things you need to know. The second will change everything and nothing. Half the estate to me, half to Adrian, but with conditions that made my head spin. References to truths that must be reckoned with, and a sealed envelope hidden in my father's private study." Gloria had been cryptic about the timing, mentioning only that Silas had insisted it remain secret unless I returned to Boston of my own accord. I stood now before the Blackwood estate, A Georgian mansion that had intimidated me as a child and seemed smaller now, somehow diminished by time and my own distance from it. The November wind cut through my jacket as I used the key Gloria had given me. Apparently my father had instructed her to keep one for this exact purpose. The house felt like a mausoleum. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light filtering through tall windows, and every step on the hardwood floors echoed with memories I'd tried to forget. The walls were lined with portraits of Blackwood ancestors, stern-faced men and women who'd built this legacy from nothing. I'd never felt worthy of their painted gazes, even as a child. My father's study was exactly as I remembered. Mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a massive desk that dominated the room, and that peculiar smell of old paper and expensive cologne. The second will had mentioned a drawer, locked, containing what I needed to find. I searched methodically, checking each drawer until I found one that wouldn't open. The key was taped to the underside of the desk, typical of my father's paranoid attention to detail. Inside I found it, a thick manila envelope marked "To the one who walked away" in his distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were photographs. Some I recognized from family albums, others I'd never seen. A younger version of my father, with a man who looked remarkably like him, both in military uniforms. Documents in my father's handwriting, journal entries that spoke of regret, of mistakes that echo through generations. And there, at the bottom, a single name that made my blood run cold: Leo Blackwood. Marcus? The voice startled me. I turned to find Evelyn Monroe in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in the same careful bun she'd worn for as long as I could remember. She'd been our housekeeper since I was 7, the closest thing to maternal warmth this house had ever known. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Evelyn, I stood, suddenly feeling like that 7-year-old boy again. I didn't know you were still here. Where else would I go? Her smile was sad, but genuine. This house has been my life, Marcus. Even after everything. She moved into the room with the careful steps of someone who'd navigated these halls for decades. Her eyes fell on the scattered photographs and documents, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. "You found it, then," she said quietly. "I wondered if you would." "Found what, Evelyn? What is all this?" She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, kept too many secrets. "The truth your father could never bring himself to tell you, about Leo, about your mother, about why you were always different from Adrian." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "Sit down, child. There are things you need to know. Things I've carried for 36 years. Evelyn moved to the window, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust on the sill. For a long moment she said nothing, and I wondered if she was gathering courage or simply deciding where to begin. "Your mother was beautiful," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Catherine Blackwood. But she wasn't happy here, Marcus, not with your father." Quote, I'd heard fragments of this story before. My mother's death when I was 3, the car accident that Silas never discussed. But there had always been gaps, silences that felt deliberate. "She loved someone else," Evelyn continued, turning back to face me. "Leo Blackwood, your father's younger brother." The photograph in my hand suddenly made sense. The 2 men in uniform, the resemblance that went beyond family similarity. "Uncle Leo," I said, though I had no memory of him. "I thought he died in Vietnam." "No, child. He left, after Catherine died, after the truth came out." Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Your father discovered the affair just before the accident. There were words, terrible words between the brothers." My chest felt tight, as if the air in the room had suddenly thickened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your father spent 36 years wondering if you were his son or his brothers." She moved closer, her voice gentle but unflinching. "The timing was unclear. Catherine never said. And your father, proud as he was, could never bring himself to ask for a test." The documents scattered across the desk suddenly took on new meaning. My father's cryptic references to truths that must be reckoned with, the way he'd always held me at arm's length while embracing Adrian. Not cruelty, but uncertainty. Fear that I carried another man's blood while bearing his name. Leo, I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue. Where is he now? Alive, as far as I know. Living up in Maine, near Bar Harbor. He never married, never had other children. Your father kept track of him, though he'd never admit it. She reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. I found this address in your father's desk last week. I think he wanted you to find Leo. I took the paper with hands that weren't quite steady. Did Gloria know about this? Gloria knew there were questions. She's been your father's lawyer for 30 years. She knew everything except the one thing that mattered most. Evelyn's smile was sad. Whether you were truly his son, or just the boy he raised as one. The silence stretched between us, heavy with decades of unspoken truth. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows of the house that might never have been my true home. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked. That's up to you, child, but I think your father hoped you'd want to know the truth, all of it. Quote, the drive to Bar Harbor took 3 hours through winding coastal roads that seemed designed to give a man time to think. I'd called Gloria before leaving Boston, demanding to know what else she'd hidden from me. Her response had been carefully measured. Your father left instructions about Leo. If you chose to seek him out, I was to provide you with this. She'd handed me a manila envelope containing old legal documents, property records, and a single photograph of Leo from the 1980s. Older, weathered, but unmistakably a Blackwood. The address led me to a weathered cottage overlooking Frenchman Bay, its cedar shingles gray with age and salt air. A pickup truck sat in the gravel driveway, rust eating at its wheel wells. This was a far cry from the Blackwood estate, but somehow it felt more honest. I sat in my rental car for 10 minutes, engine off, watching smoke curl from the chimney. What do you say to a man who might be your father? A man who'd been erased from family history, who'd loved your mother while she was married to his brother. The door opened before I knocked. Leo Blackwood stood in the threshold, 73 years old, silver-bearded, with eyes the same steel gray as my own. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been pain. Marcus. His voice was rough, unused to visitors. I wondered if you'd come. You know who I am? You look like your mother. He stepped aside, gesturing me in. Coffee's on. The cottage was sparse but comfortable. Books lining makeshift shelves, fishing gear in the corners, photographs of coastal landscapes on the walls. No family photos, I noticed. No reminders of the life he'd left behind. How long have you known? I asked, accepting the mug he offered. About Silas dying? A week. Leo settled into a worn armchair across from me. About you existing? 36 years? He studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. The question is whether you're here for answers or accusations. Answers, I said. I think I've had enough accusations for one lifetime. Leo nodded slowly. Your mother was the most honest person I ever knew. When she told me she was pregnant, she also told me she didn't know whose child you were. The timing, he shrugged, could have been either of us. Did you love her? More than anything, the words came without hesitation, but she loved Silas too, in her way. She was torn between duty and desire, and it destroyed her. Quote, you never wanted to know, never wanted a test? Leo's laugh was bitter. What would that have accomplished? If you were mine, I'd have stolen you from the only father you knew. If you were his, I'd have known for certain that I'd lost everything. He leaned forward. Better to live with hope than certainty sometimes. Silas left me something, I said, reaching into my jacket. A key. Said you'd know what it opened. Leo took the key with hands that trembled slightly, whether from age or emotion, I couldn't tell. He turned it over in his calloused fingers, studying it as if it might reveal its secrets through touch alone. "I haven't seen this in 40 years, he said quietly. "Come with me." He led me up a narrow staircase to the cottage's small attic, ducking under low beams. In the corner beneath a dust-covered tarp sat an old cedar chest. Leo knelt beside it, his movements careful and deliberate. "Silas brought this to me the week before Catherine died," he said, fitting the key into the brass lock. "Made me promise to keep it safe, never to open it. Said if something happened to him and if you ever came looking, I should give it to you." The lid creaked open, releasing the scent of cedar and old paper. Inside were layers of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a small tape recorder from the 1980s. Leo stepped back, his face pale. "I kept my word," he said. "It's yours now." Back downstairs, I spread the contents across Leo's kitchen table, like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. The photographs showed my parents' wedding, family gatherings, moments of apparent happiness that I'd never seen before. But it was the documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing offshore accounts in my name opened when I was 7 years old. Real estate transfers that used my social security number for properties I'd never heard of. Letters between my father and various business associates discussing the boys' portfolio and Marcus's holdings. "Jesus," I whispered. "He's been using my identity for decades." The tape recorder sat silent in the center of the table, its presence somehow ominous. I pressed play with a finger that wasn't quite steady. My father's voice filled the small kitchen, younger than I remembered, but unmistakably his. "If you're hearing this, Marcus, then I'm dead and you've finally come home. I need you to understand something about the money, about the accounts in your name. I never meant for it to go this far." The recording crackled with static, but his words cut through clearly. "I suspected you weren't my blood, but you were always the better man, more honest than any Blackwood had a right to be. So I used that honesty. I built an empire in your shadow, using your name to hide money that should never have existed." Leo was watching me, his expression unreadable. "What kind of money?" he asked. The tape continued. "Bribes, Marcus. Kickbacks from city contracts. Payments from developers who needed permits expedited. Every dirty dollar that built the Blackwood fortune, it's all tied to your name. All of it." My hands were shaking now. He made me complicit in everything I stand against. I drove back to Boston in a haze, the cedar chest secured in my trunk like evidence of a crime I'd never committed but somehow inherited. The weight of what I'd discovered pressed down on me with each mile. Not just the corruption, but the calculated way my father had used my identity as a shield for his moral failures. Helen Shaw lived in a brownstone in Back Bay, the kind of understated elegance that spoke of old money and good taste. We'd been roommates at Boston College back when I still believed I could change the world through social work, and she was determined to understand the human psyche. Now she was Dr. Helen Shaw, family therapist, and I was a man whose entire identity had been built on a lie. "You look like hell," she said when she opened the door, her auburn hair streaked with silver but her green eyes as sharp as ever. "Come in. Coffee?" Her living room was warm and inviting, filled with books and plants, and the kind of comfortable furniture that invited confession. I'd called her from the road, needing someone who knew me before I became tangled in Blackwood family secrets. "Tell me," she said, settling into her favorite chair with a steaming mug. "All of it." So I did. The funeral, the wills, the discovery of Leo, the offshore accounts, the tape recording that had shattered everything I thought I knew about my father and myself. Helen listened without interruption, her therapist's training evident in the way she absorbed information without judgment. "What are you trying to fix, Marcus?" she asked when I finished. "Your past or your future?" "I don't know the difference anymore. Your father spent 36 years wondering if you were his son. You've spent 36 years wondering if you were worthy of being his son. Both of you were asking the wrong question." I set down my coffee, too agitated to sit still. What's the right question? Who do you want to be now that you know the truth? I moved to her window, looking out at the tree-lined street where normal people lived normal lives. "I've been complicit in corruption, Helen. My name is on accounts filled with dirty money. Everything I've worked for, everything I've stood for, it's all compromised. By your choice or his? The question stopped me cold. His, but nothing. You didn't choose to have your identity stolen. You didn't choose to be used as a front for corruption. You were 7 years old when those accounts were opened. She joined me at the window, her voice gentle but firm. The question isn't whether you're guilty of your father's crimes. The question is what you're going to do about them now. Adrian doesn't know any of this. The second will gives me half the estate, but if I expose the corruption, you'll destroy the family business and probably send your brother to prison for continuing your father's practices. Helen nodded. Yes, I see the problem. Do I have the right to make that choice for him? Do you have the right not to? She turned to face me fully. Marcus, you've spent your entire adult life fighting for people who've been exploited by systems like your father's. You've dedicated yourself to justice, to helping the powerless against the powerful. Now you're in a position to actually do something about it, and you're hesitating because it might hurt your family? It's not that simple. It never is, but sometimes the right choice is the hard one. She smiled sadly. You need to talk to Adrian. Not to accuse him, but to give him the truth. Let him decide who he wants to be too. I met Adrian at the Blackwood estate, choosing the library where we'd once done homework together as children. The irony wasn't lost on me, returning to the scene of our shared childhood to destroy what remained of our family's legacy. Adrian arrived in his usual style, expensive suit impeccable despite the late hour. He looked annoyed, probably assuming I wanted to contest the will or beg for money. If only it were that simple. This better be important, Marcus. I have a conference call with Tokyo in an hour. I'd spread the contents of Leo's chest across the mahogany table. Documents, photographs, the tape recorder sitting silent but ominous. Adrian's expression shifted from irritation to confusion as he recognized bank statements and property transfers. What is all this? Sit down, Adrian, please. He remained standing, his jaw tightening. If this is some desperate attempt to claim part of the estate, it's bigger than the estate. I pressed play on the tape recorder. Our father's voice filled the room, confessing to decades of corruption, bribery, and fraud. Adrian's face went white as the recording detailed offshore accounts, falsified permits, and kickbacks that had built the Blackwood fortune. When Silas's voice mentioned using my name and identity as a shield, Adrian sank into the nearest chair. This is impossible, he whispered. Dad was legitimate. Everything he built was bought with dirty money. I slid the bank statements across to him. Look at the signatures, Adrian. Look at the account names. He stared at the documents, his hands shaking. Your name. It's on everything. I was 7 when the first account was opened. Old enough to have a social security number, too young to ask questions. The words came out harder than I intended. He used me as a front for 30 years. Adrian's composure cracked completely. Do you have any idea what this means? The business, the board, the investors, everything will collapse if this comes out. I know. Then why are you showing me this? His voice rose, desperate. Why not just keep it buried with him? Because I can't live with it, and neither can you. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. There's more, Adrian. The second will, the one Gloria showed me. It redistributes the estate between us. But accepting it means accepting responsibility for cleaning up this mess. And if we don't, then I go to the authorities alone with everything. The silence stretched between us, filled with 36 years of rivalry, resentment, and complicated love. Adrian stared at the documents, as if they might transform into something less damaging through sheer force of will. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want you to choose who you're going to be, the son who continues his father's corruption, or the man who helps fix it. And if I choose wrong, then you'll have to live with that choice, just like I've had to live with unknowingly enabling everything I stand against. Adrian called me 3 days later, his voice hollow but resolute. I need to see Gloria. With you. I've made my choice. Quote, we met at her office on a gray December morning, the harbor outside her windows churning under heavy clouds. Adrian looked like he hadn't slept since our confrontation, stubble darkening his jaw, his usually perfect hair disheveled. The weight of truth had aged him years in days. Gloria spread the second will across her desk, alongside the documents from Leo's chest. Her practiced composure cracked slightly as she absorbed the scope of Silas's deception. 30 years, she murmured, shaking her head. 30 years of representing him, and I never suspected the full extent. Did you know about the accounts in my name? I asked. Some of them. I helped establish the legitimate ones when you were young. College funds, trust accounts. I assumed the others were extensions of those. She looked up at me with something that might have been an apology. I should have asked more questions. Adrian leaned forward, his voice tight. What's our exposure? Legally. Substantial. The statute of limitations protects some of the older violations, but the recent activity. Gloria's expression was grim. The IRS will want their money. The city will want investigations, and if federal prosecutors get involved. Prison, Adrian finished. Possibly. Unless we cooperate fully, she looked between us. The second will gives you both legal standing to act on behalf of the estate. You can voluntarily disclose everything, work with authorities to make restitution. I thought of Helen's words about choosing who I wanted to be. What about the business, the employees? The legitimate parts can survive if we move quickly. Separate the clean assets from the contaminated ones. Gloria turned to Adrian. You'll lose most of the real estate portfolio, but the construction company itself has clean contracts. Adrian stared out the window for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steadier than I'd heard it in days. Do it. File the second will. Disclose everything to the authorities. I won't build my life on blood money. Adrian? No, Marcus, you were right. Dad made us both victims of his choices, but we don't have to remain victims. He managed a bitter smile. Besides, I've spent 3 days reviewing the books. Half our major contracts were secured through bribes. The business was going to collapse eventually anyway. Gloria began drafting paperwork with efficient precision. I'll need to contact the district attorney's office, the IRS, and the state attorney general, if you're serious about full cooperation. We are, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. As we signed documents that would dismantle our father's empire, Adrian looked at me with something I hadn't seen since childhood. Respect. What will you do with your half? He asked. Start over, build something clean. I thought of the youth shelter where I'd volunteered, the families I'd helped find housing. What about you? Learn to sleep at night again. 6 months later, I stood in the same cemetery where I'd buried my father, but this time I wasn't alone. Helen walked beside me, her hand warm in mine as we approached the Blackwood family plot. The headstone was simple granite, bearing only Silas's name and dates. No flowery epitaphs about beloved father or successful businessman. The legal proceedings had moved faster than Gloria anticipated. Full cooperation meant reduced sentences for both Adrian and me, though we'd both served brief terms for the financial crimes committed in my name. Adrian had rebuilt the construction company from the ground up, keeping only the employees and contracts that were clean. The rest had been liquidated to pay restitution. Do you regret it? Helen asked as we stood before the grave. Exposing everything? No. I pulled the final letter from my jacket, the one I'd never opened, the one that had sat in that first will, but I regret that he never gave us the chance to fix it together. I broke the seal and read my father's last words to me. Marcus, I know you'll never forgive me for the distance I kept. I told myself it was because you might not be my blood, but the truth is simpler. You were always the moral one, the one who would have stopped me if you'd known. I was too much of a coward to risk losing what I'd built, even if it was built on lies. You were always the better man. Live like it, Silas. Helen read over my shoulder, her grip on my hand tightening. He knew, she said softly. He knew I'd choose the truth over the money. He knew I'd tear it all down. I folded the letter carefully. Maybe that's why he left the second will. Maybe he wanted me to. We walked back toward the cemetery entrance, past monuments to Boston's founding families. The Blackwood plot would join them in obscurity, another family legacy reduced to dates on stone. "I have something for you," Helen said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "It came yesterday." The return address was Bar Harbor, Maine. Inside was a brief note in Leo's careful handwriting. "DNA test results enclosed. Thought you should know. Whatever the answer, you're the man you chose to become. That's what matters. L." I stared at the sealed laboratory envelope, then handed it back to Helen unopened. "Burn it," I said. "Marcus, I know who I am now. I'm not defined by Silas's blood or Leo's. I'm defined by the choices I make." I thought of the youth center I was opening next month, funded by the clean portion of my inheritance. "I'm Marcus Shaw now. The name feels right." Helen smiled, understanding immediately. "Welcome to the family." As we drove away from the cemetery, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 36 years. Peace. Not because I'd inherited a fortune or claimed a legacy, but because I'd finally chosen my own. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.